Once, in a small, forgotten town nestled deep in the woods, there stood an old, abandoned asylum. It was a place of whispered legends and chilling tales, a building that had seen the worst of human misery and madness. Its walls, cracked and decaying, held the echoes of tortured screams and desperate pleas for help. In this town lived a young man named Jacob. He was a curious soul, drawn to the mysteries of the asylum. One stormy night, with lightning illuminating the sky and thunder rumbling in the distance, Jacob decided to explore the forsaken place. Armed with only a flashlight and a sense of adventure, he set out, unaware of the horrors that awaited him. As he approached the asylum, the wind howled through the broken windows, creating eerie whispers that sent shivers down his spine. The front door, hanging on its hinges, creaked ominously as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mold and decay. His flashlight beam flickered, casting long shadows that danced on the peeling walls. Jacob wandered through the halls, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He came across old patient rooms, their beds rusted and sheets torn, as if the inhabitants had left in a hurry. The walls were covered in strange symbols and writings, messages from those who had lost their sanity within these confines. In one room, he found a journal belonging to a nurse who had worked there decades ago. Her entries detailed the experiments conducted by a twisted doctor who believed he could cure madness through horrifying means. Patients were subjected to cruel treatments, and many never left the asylum alive. Suddenly, Jacob heard a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from down the hall. His heart pounded as he followed the sound, which grew louder and more insistent. The tapping led him to a locked door at the end of a corridor. He found a rusty key hanging nearby and, with trembling hands, unlocked the door. Inside, the room was dark and cold. As his flashlight swept across the floor, Jacob saw a figure huddled in the corner. It was a girl, no older than 12, her clothes tattered and her face pale. She was the source of the tapping, her fingers drumming on the floor in a slow, deliberate rhythm. "Who are you?" Jacob asked, his voice barely a whisper. The girl looked up, her eyes hollow and lifeless. "Help me," she pleaded. "He won't let me go." Before Jacob could respond, the air grew colder, and a sinister presence filled the room. The doctor, a ghostly figure with hollow eyes and a malevolent grin, appeared behind the girl. His bony fingers rested on her shoulder, holding her in place. "You shouldn't be here," the doctor hissed. "She belongs to me." Jacob felt an icy grip around his throat, choking him. The flashlight fell from his hand, casting erratic beams of light around the room. He struggled to breathe, his vision fading. Just as he was about to lose consciousness, he heard the girl whisper, "Run." Summoning all his strength, Jacob broke free from the ghostly grip and bolted out of the room. He sprinted through the dark halls, the doctor's sinister laughter echoing behind him. He didn't stop until he was outside, gasping for air in the pouring rain. Years later, Jacob would still wake up in a cold sweat, the memory of that night haunting his dreams. He never returned to the asylum, but he knew the doctor and the girl were still there, trapped in a nightmare that would never end. And sometimes, on stormy nights, he could still hear the faint, rhythmic tapping, a reminder of the horrors that lurked in the darkness. Years had passed since Jacob's harrowing encounter at the old asylum. He had tried to move on, but the memories of that night haunted him, creeping into his dreams and turning them into vivid nightmares. Determined to find some closure, Jacob decided to investigate the asylum's dark history and perhaps free the souls trapped within its walls. He returned to the town and sought out the local historian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Whitmore. She was the keeper of the town's secrets and knew more about the asylum than anyone else. Jacob found her in her cozy home, surrounded by old books and documents. "I see you've come back," Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice raspy with age. "The asylum still calls to you, doesn't it?" Jacob nodded. "I need to understand what happened there. I need to help that girl." Mrs. Whitmore sighed and handed him a dusty tome. "This is the journal of Dr. Elias Grayson, the asylum's head physician. It contains detailed accounts of his experiments and the horrors he inflicted on his patients. Maybe it will help you find a way to free those trapped souls. Jacob spent the next few days poring over the journal. Dr. Grayson had been a brilliant but deranged man, obsessed with curing insanity through inhumane methods. His most disturbing experiment involved a ritual meant to transfer madness from the patients to himself, believing he could control it. The ritual had gone horribly wrong, binding his soul and those of his victims to the asylum forever. Determined to put an end to this curse, Jacob sought out the assistance of a local psychic named Eliza. She was known for her ability to communicate with spirits and had a reputation for her unwavering courage in facing the supernatural. Jacob explained everything to her, and despite her initial reluctance, she agreed to help. On another stormy night, Jacob and Eliza made their way back to the asylum. The building loomed ahead, more sinister than ever, its broken windows resembling eyes watching their every move. Armed with the knowledge from Dr. Grayson's journal and Eliza's psychic abilities, they entered the decaying structure. As they ventured deeper into the asylum, the temperature dropped, and the oppressive atmosphere weighed heavily on them. Eliza could sense the tortured souls, their anguish palpable. They reached the room where Jacob had encountered the girl. The tapping had started again, more frantic this time. "She's here," Eliza whispered, "and she's not alone." Suddenly, the doctor appeared, his ghostly form flickering in the dim light. "You shouldn't have come back," he snarled. Ignoring his threats, Eliza began the ritual to release the trapped souls. She chanted ancient incantations, her voice steady and powerful. The doctor howled in fury, trying to disrupt the ritual, but Jacob held his ground, protecting Eliza as she worked. The girl's spirit appeared, her eyes filled with hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "He can't hurt us anymore." As Eliza completed the ritual, a blinding light filled the room. The spirits, including the girl and the doctor, were drawn into the light, their forms dissolving into it. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by an eerie calm. Jacob and Eliza stood in silence, the weight of the moment sinking in. The asylum, once a place of unimaginable horror, felt lighter, as if the very walls sighed in relief. "It's over," Eliza said, her voice filled with exhaustion and triumph. Jacob nodded, tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Eliza. You've helped me give them peace." They left the asylum knowing they had done something extraordinary. The building, though still abandoned and decaying, no longer felt like a place of evil. The town slowly began to heal, the dark legend of the asylum fading into history. Jacob returned to his life, but he never forgot the girl or the night he helped free her spirit. The experience changed him, deepening his understanding of the unknown and the power of courage and compassion. And though he never stopped seeking out mysteries, he did so with a newfound respect for the darkness and the light that exists within it. Years passed, and the story of the asylum began to fade into the realm of forgotten legends. Jacob moved on, living a quiet life in a nearby town, his nights no longer plagued by nightmares. Yet, deep down, he always felt a lingering connection to the place where he had confronted the darkness. One day, Jacob received an unexpected visit from a stranger named Ethan. He was a young historian and paranormal investigator who had come across the story of Jacob's encounter at the asylum. Ethan had a keen interest in unraveling the mysteries of haunted places and believed there was more to the asylum's tale. "I know what you did," Ethan said, his eyes shining with excitement. "You freed those souls, but I think there's something you missed. There's more to that place than just Dr. Grayson's curse." Jacob, though hesitant, felt a familiar pull. He agreed to accompany Ethan back to the asylum, hoping to finally put an end to the unfinished business. Armed with modern ghost hunting equipment and Ethan's extensive research, they set out on another stormy night. As they approached the asylum, now overgrown with vines and nearly swallowed by the forest, an unsettling feeling washed over Jacob. The building, though still a decaying relic, seemed to pulsate with an eerie energy. Ethan explained that he had discovered references to a secret underground level, where even darker experiments had taken place. experiments that were never documented in Dr. Grayson's journal. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dampness and decay. They carefully navigated the crumbling corridors, guided by Ethan's detailed maps. In a hidden corner of the basement, they found an old, rusted trapdoor. With some effort, they pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. As they ventured down, the atmosphere grew colder and more oppressive. The walls were lined with strange symbols and drawings, more disturbing than those Jacob had seen before. Their flashlights flickered, casting long, unsettling shadows. At the bottom, they discovered a series of small, windowless rooms. Each one contained ancient, arcane equipment and disturbing remnants of experiments. In the last room, they found a large, ominous stone altar, covered in dark stains and surrounded by candles long since extinguished. Ethan examined the altar closely, his expression growing more serious. This isn't just a place of medical experiments. This is where they performed rituals, trying to harness supernatural powers. The spirits we freed were only part of the darkness here. As they spoke, a cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing their flashlights. In the pitch black, they heard whispers, voices overlapping, pleading, and angry. The air crackled with energy, and a faint glow began to emanate from the altar. Suddenly, the room was filled with apparitions, the tormented souls of those who had been sacrificed in these dark rituals. Among them, Jacob recognized the girl he had freed years ago. She reached out to him, her expression one of both warning and desperation. "You must stop it," she whispered. "The darkness is awakening." Ethan quickly began setting up his equipment, determined to capture evidence and find a way to banish the malevolent force. Jacob, guided by the girl's spirit, helped him place protective symbols around the room, hoping to contain whatever was stirring. As they completed the preparations, the altar's glow intensified, and a shadowy figure emerged. It was a manifestation of pure evil, a dark entity born from the twisted rituals. It moved toward them, its presence suffocating and malevolent. Ethan recited an incantation he had found in his research, while Jacob, driven by both fear and determination, stood his ground. The entity screamed, a sound that pierced through their very souls, but slowly, it began to weaken, drawn back toward the altar. With a final, desperate push, the entity was sucked into the altar, and the room was plunged into silence. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a calm, almost sacred stillness. The spirits, including the girl, began to fade, their expressions peaceful. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have freed us all." Jacob and Ethan left the asylum, knowing they had faced something far darker than they had ever imagined. The building, now truly empty of its malevolent presence, stood as a silent monument to the horrors that had taken place within. Jacob, feeling a sense of closure at last, returned to his life, forever changed by the experiences. Ethan, with newfound respect for the paranormal, continued his investigations, always remembering the bravery and determination that had led them to face the ultimate darkness. The asylum, now quiet and still, slowly crumbled into the earth, its secrets buried but not forgotten, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable evil. Jacob and Ethan's lives returned to a semblance of normalcy after their harrowing encounter at the asylum. However, the bond they had forged and the shared experience of confronting such darkness kept them in touch. Ethan continued his investigations into the paranormal, and Jacob found solace in knowing the asylum spirits were finally at peace. One evening, months after their last encounter, Ethan called Jacob with an urgent tone in his voice. "Jacob, I need your help. I found something that could be connected to the asylum. There's another site, an old mansion, where similar dark rituals were performed." Jacob felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Ethan replied. "I've done the research. The mansion belonged to a cult that worked with Dr. Grayson. They practiced even darker rites, and I believe there's still a powerful artifact hidden there. We need to destroy it to ensure the evil is truly eradicated." Despite his initial hesitation, Jacob agreed to join Ethan. The prospect of facing another supernatural threat was daunting, but the need to ensure the darkness was permanently vanquished drove him forward. They arrived at the mansion on a foggy night. The building was a grand, Gothic structure, its windows dark and lifeless. Ivy clung to the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Ethan had brought a team of fellow investigators, equipped with advanced ghost hunting technology and protective charms. Inside, the mansion was a labyrinth of corridors and rooms, each more unsettling than the last. The wallpaper peeled away in long strips, and the floors creaked underfoot. Strange symbols were etched into the walls, remnants of the cult's rituals. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the house itself was aware of their presence. Ethan led them to a hidden library he had discovered in his research. The room was filled with ancient books and scrolls, many of them bound in human skin. At the center of the room was a large, ornate chest, covered in arcane symbols. "This is it," Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. "The artifact should be inside." As they approached the chest, a sudden coldness enveloped them. The air grew thick with malevolent energy, and shadows danced across the walls. Jacob felt a familiar sense of dread, the same he had felt at the asylum. Ethan carefully opened the chest, revealing a black, pulsating crystal. It radiated a dark energy that made Jacob's skin crawl. The room seemed to come alive with whispers and ghostly apparitions, remnants of the cult members who had perished there. "We need to destroy it," Ethan said, pulling out a hammer and chisel. "Stand back." As Ethan prepared to strike the crystal, a deafening roar echoed through the room. The shadows coalesced into a monstrous figure, a guardian of the artifact, bound to protect it at all costs. The figure lunged at them, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. Jacob and the team tried to fend off the entity, using their charms and equipment to weaken it. The battle was fierce, the entity's power overwhelming. It knocked several team members aside, leaving Jacob and Ethan to face it. Ethan struck the crystal with all his might, causing a crack to appear. The entity screamed in rage, its form flickering. Jacob, driven by desperation, grabbed the hammer and delivered the final blow. The crystal shattered, releasing a blinding light that engulfed the room. The entity let out a final, ear-piercing scream before dissolving into nothingness. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by an almost serene silence. The mansion, once a place of dark power, now felt empty and lifeless. Ethan and Jacob stood in the aftermath, breathing heavily. The rest of the team began to stir, recovering from the intense battle. They knew they had faced something truly evil and had emerged victorious. In the weeks that followed, news of their success spread. The mansion was sealed off, its dark secrets left to crumble into obscurity. Jacob and Ethan, having faced unimaginable horrors together, became close friends, their bond unbreakable. Though they had conquered the darkness, they remained vigilant. They knew that the world was full of mysteries and dangers lurking in the shadows. But they also knew that, together, they could face whatever came their way, armed with courage, knowledge, and an unyielding determination to protect the living from the remnants of the past. Life began to return to normal for Jacob and Ethan after their battle at the mansion. They continued their respective lives, but the bond they had forged remained strong. They kept in touch, sharing their latest findings and supporting each other through the residual fear that occasionally surfaced. One quiet evening, months after the destruction of the crystal, Jacob received a strange package in the mail. It had no return address, and the handwriting on the label was unfamiliar. Inside, he found an old, leather-bound book with a note tucked between its pages. The note read, "You have freed many souls, but the darkness runs deeper than you know. This book contains the knowledge you need. Use it wisely." Jacob's heart raced as he flipped through the book. It was filled with detailed accounts of ancient rituals, powerful artifacts, and the history of the cult that had worked with Dr. Grayson. The final pages described a prophecy about a hidden temple, where the source of the cult's dark power lay dormant. Jacob immediately called Ethan, who agreed to meet him the next day. They pored over the book together, deciphering its cryptic messages and piecing together the clues. It became clear that their previous battles were just the beginning. The true source of the evil they had encountered was still out there, waiting to be unleashed. Determined to put an end to the darkness once and for all, Jacob and Ethan gathered a team of experienced investigators and prepared for their final confrontation. Armed with the knowledge from the book and their previous experiences, they set out to find the hidden temple. Their journey took them deep into an ancient forest, to a place where the trees grew so dense that sunlight barely touched the ground. After days of searching, they found a concealed entrance buried beneath the roots of an enormous oak tree. The entrance led to a labyrinth of underground tunnels, each passage more sinister than the last. As they ventured deeper, they encountered numerous traps and supernatural obstacles designed to protect the temple. Ghostly apparitions whispered warnings, and shadows seemed to come alive, reaching out to grab them. But the team pressed on, driven by their determination to eradicate the source of the evil. Finally, they reached the heart of the temple. A massive chamber, its walls covered in ancient runes, housed a stone altar similar to the one they had found in the mansion. At the center of the altar was a dark, swirling vortex of energy, the very source of the cult's power. Ethan began the ritual described in the book, chanting the ancient incantations with Jacob by his side. The ground trembled, and the air grew thick with a malevolent presence. As the ritual progressed, the vortex's energy became more chaotic, lashing out in all directions. Suddenly, the room was filled with the spectral forms of the cult members, their eyes glowing with hatred. They attacked with relentless fury, determined to protect their dark power. Jacob and the team fought back, using every ounce of strength and knowledge they had gained over their years of investigation. As the battle raged, Ethan continued the ritual, his voice rising above the chaos. The vortex began to shrink, its energy growing weaker. With one final, desperate push, Ethan completed the incantation. The vortex collapsed in on itself, releasing a blinding light that engulfed the chamber. When the light faded, the spectral forms of the cult members were gone, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. The temple, once a place of unimaginable darkness, now felt empty and still. The team stood in silence, the weight of their victory sinking in. Exhausted but triumphant, Jacob and Ethan knew they had finally put an end to the source of the cult's power. They had faced the darkness head-on and emerged victorious, freeing countless souls from its grip. In the days that followed, the temple was sealed off, and the forest began to heal. Jacob and Ethan returned to their lives, forever changed by their experiences. They remained vigilant, knowing that the world still held many mysteries and dangers, but confident in their ability to face whatever came their way. Their bond, forged in the fires of their battles, remained unbreakable. Together, they continued to explore the unknown, protect the innocent, and ensure that the darkness would never again rise to threaten the living.